Okay.
All right. All right, everybody. It's time for the next talk. And you may have heard earlier in my talk, I mentioned the Honeycomb distribution that the Order of the Bee does. It's a distribution of Community Edition. Daren Firminger and Martin Cosgrave are going to talk about that. And these two are members of the Order of the Bee. They've been doing a ton of work around the platform and a lot of DevOps type stuff that the Order needs done. So these guys are the right guys to be having this talk. So thank you, and I look forward to it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Cheers. Welcome to our talk, Honeycomb and Beyond, and thank you all for coming. I'm Martin Cosgrave. I'm an Alfresco enthusiast and founder member and current board member of the Order of the Bee. In a professional capacity, I play with Java, DevOps, and distributed systems.
And I'm Daren Firminger. I work for a company called Digital Catalyst. We build enterprise applications using open source frameworks. We've been using Alfresco since version 3, and yeah, we're very keen to use it. One of the very first goals of Order of the Bee was to create a distribution of the Alfresco community to serve as a ready-to-go, out-of-the-box demonstration of the capabilities of the Community Edition. After the successful reception of the Order of the Bee project at the London Alfresco Summit, Martin and I agreed to collaborate to create a base upon which we could build a candidate for the Honeycomb distribution.
We wanted it to be a fully functional product out of the box, so it should come with various extras which normally would be added on by the consultant implementing Alfresco. Instead, we were looking to create a standalone install that would allow small businesses to use Alfresco with a minimum of fuss. I'd been doing some work with Puppet, and I thought that while it was not really the usual way to use it, we could use it to make an installer.
We tried building shell script-based installers, but we were frustrated by what happens when a phase of the install failed. We would be left with the system in an unstable state, and rerunning the script would generally fail unless you ignored the errors for each phase. But using Puppet, we could guarantee a machine state. A Puppet run will take a machine from its current state to the state described by the Puppet manifests. So it didn't matter if the install had not completed due to some transient error. The next time it runs, then it would attempt to bring the machine to the required state.
Puppet also gives you the advantage of recording your desired system to state as a series of text files, and so it's a good candidate for source control. We were able to add additional features not present in the Community installer, such as importing SSL certificates and setting up an Apache reverse proxy in front of Tomcat. The text-based configuration tool allowed customization of other options, such as database server location and credentials.
While we don't want to go into a lot of detail about Puppet's configuration, it might be useful to see an example or two of the syntax. This first slide shows. Okay. All right, so
we haven't got the slide.
The slide that would have been there showed a fragment of Puppet's manifest, which sets up different variables based on which version of Alfresco we are trying to build. You can see, well, you can't see, but you would see the $indexer variable, which is set to a different value depending on the version. This essentially allows us to manage multiple versions of Alfresco using the same build system. Right, so.
Yeah, we somehow have got a really old slides, and we haven't got the proper slides, which is really unfortunate. So some of this might not make a lot of sense.
No.
Yeah, it was quite a learning curve, and it took us a while to find a good structure. We were keen to make it easy to include add-ons, and the structure we chose reflected that, but soon we realized we would need to have extensive tests so we'd be able to verify the functioning of the system after adding new extensions. Daren made a suite of tests using Selenium and Python, and we used that to verify the state of the system using things like logging in, creating sites, checking the previews are rendered, and then we needed a framework to run the tests automatically. We started to look at Jenkins for continuous integration, but we were trying to test the whole system rather than just the artifact of a programming language, and there were some plugins, but we didn't really find anything that really worked very well, so we looked around for something else.
Then we came across Travis CI project. Travis was interesting since it offered a free CI tier, which we could watch our public GitHub repo and automatically build the latest version and run our tests. We were especially interested when we realized that Travis built in fresh VMs, Amazon VMs for every run. It seemed just what we needed. And we started running a matrix of our supported versions and platforms of 4.2F and 5.0X on Ubuntu and CentOS on every GitHub commit that we made. At this point, we should probably publicly apologise to Travis' team for the abuse we wrought on their servers. We soon realised, however, we were abusing Travis too much and running up against their timeouts. So
we're getting a lot of false negatives in our test runs. What I eventually did was write a quick and dirty test rig, basically running against DigitalOcean. We had a Vagrant with the DigitalOcean plugin, and we would run 4, 8, however many we needed, a matrix of tests, run in parallel. The tool was eventually supposed to give us build reports, but we never got that far with it. But it did give us enough that we could see visually whether the tests are passing or failing. There was one other interesting issue that if you work with virtual systems, you might come across this. And if you ever see that Tomcat is taking like 10 minutes to start up, check for a line talking about the random number generator. If you're on a VM environment or a container environment, you might find that the entropy of the host is being exhausted. We found an entropy generator tool which uses system activity to generate entropy and push it back into the random number generator. If you're using VMs or containers, look for a tool called Haveged. It's an acronym, and it's basically will create enough entropy that you will get a performance start.
So what did we learn during this process? Well, getting collaboration going is hard. Despite there being a working group within Order of the Bee to deliver a Honeycomb distribution, we struggled with enthusiasm. Perhaps this is due to the strangeness of Puppet for many Alfresco developers, perhaps. I think we can understand that. After all, we've gone through that learning curve too. Perhaps it would have been better to drop the Puppet stuff and use Chef instead. After all, Maurizio had already done some work on this Alfresco boxes project at that time, which uses Chef. But we tried to decipher Maurizio's work, and perhaps we were limited by what we'd already learned about Puppet, getting in the way of learning Chef. In the event, it would have involved another steep learning curve at a time when we were just starting to get Puppet under our belts, and so we persevered with Puppet.
We found that people are really interested in version numbers. Right? I wasn't that interested in version numbers, but we put out an alpha version. It got very little interest. We thought it was feature complete. We were just looking for bug reports, and we realized eventually we're going to have to put out something and call it production. We were of the opinion that we're packaging Alfresco Community, which we see as a production-ready system. So all we were doing was adding more features to a production-ready system. For me, that's production-ready, but for some others, no. So we put the front-end Apache proxy that I mentioned, SSL certificates, firewalls, to make it out of the box, ready to roll for small businesses. Effectively, was our target we had in our minds.
We also made a painful realization that many distributors and packagers of software have already made before us. Your upstream sources can totally screw you up if they decide to move things around or change their distribution layout. For example, as well as supporting 4.2F and 5.0X branch, we were also supporting nightlies, but the naming conventions of nightlies changed, and that caused us problems, and we never really got back on top of that.
We learned some stuff about Puppet too. It actually works really well as an installer. The repeatability gives a sturdiness to the process that's missing from shell script approaches. I mean, you could make a shell script as robust as Puppet, but you would end up re-implementing the stuff that Puppet did to do exactly that same stuff. It's actually designed to be controlled from a central Puppet master server, and we were using a product called Foreman as a Puppet master. When I installed Foreman, I was quite encouraged because it itself uses Puppet to install itself, so it was good to find we weren't alone. One other thing about Puppet is that the development lifecycle is quite slow. Sometimes, to really prove that it's working, you need to start from scratch each time. And that ends up adding a lot of time to the development process. But the DigitalOcean Vagrant harness we had, that helped mitigate that process.
Currently, we have not upgraded Puppet Alfresco to be able to build the 5.1x releases of Alfresco, but I don't think we ever intended this to be the final release of Honeycomb. Rather, it was supposed to be an example to the community about how to build using all the add-ons, Puppet, etc. With the 5.1x release, we have seen installation change drastically, changing far more than the transition 4.2f to 5.0x. And the big question is whether we bite the bullet and dive back in to implement 5.1 changes. And if we do so, are we going to have the same gain change from underneath us again when we hit 5.2?
We want to get more people to try Honeycomb and to play with it and report on your successes and failures, and that's going to be a key motivating factor to get us to work more on it. Without that, it's obviously you're working on your own. It sometimes seems like you're in a vacuum, so it's good to have some feedback. And also with what at times could seem to be like a hostile upstream, and depending on how you looked at it, it's we need to have people on board to help us with the changes as they come. We're both happy to mentor people through the learning curve for Puppet, so you probably won't have as much difficulty as we did, and that's going to help us track future versions successfully, I think.
Okay, a quick question to the audience. How many people in the audience are using 5.1x in production? Okay, so we know customers who are still happy with 4.2f and older versions, while the version 5 branches definitely add new features, some great new features. For some customers, they're really not relevant or needed at the moment. We shouldn't necessarily need to commit to following Alfresco's release schedule slavishly, although obviously from some perspectives that is desirable. Reliability was and still is an important consideration for the Honeycomb distribution, finding and fixing all the bugs to ensure it's reliable. And we are running Honeycomb, we're running a build from Honeycomb for the speaker site for Beacon, and it demonstrates we are happy to our own dog food and use Honeycomb for mission critical tasks supporting the Beacon event speakers. Currently we have deployed Honeycomb across 2 machines on a 6-core processor, which gives us great performance, and it would be interesting to understand the pricing of such a thing in enterprise.
I'll just say the slides, if you go to the agenda and click through to our speech, the slides are correct on that. So, and they're not broken like they were. Okay, so Puppet's really great, but it's as I say, it's slow to develop. So in the meantime, Docker was rapidly becoming the next big thing. There's some major advantages in how it works because the system's built up in layers. So once you get each layer frozen, you don't need to rebuild it again. It comes from cache. It's an often quoted advantage for Docker, which is that multiple containers can be built from the same base layer, and you don't have as much memory impact. It's not that big a deal with Alfresco because there's not that many things that can share the same base layer apart from Tomcat share repo Solar. That really is a microservices thing. If you run 100 microservices using the same base with Docker, then you really win. But we can't really do that with Alfresco, so it's more about the convenience of the product.
There have been a few attempts to containerize Alfresco, as far as we know. But from what we've seen, they all attempted to put the whole of the stack in a single container. This is not really the way we saw Docker working. Our approach was to containerize each part of the stack separately. However, this raised another issue when using composition tools like Docker Compose or CrowdR. It's not easy to control the startup order of the containers. Again, in a microservices environment, this is not a problem. But when containerizing a previously monolithic stack, it can cause problems if a container starts before another container that depends on it. Martin chose to deal with this using a new tool called Brewer.
And apparently now the latest news is that Docker files do have a depends on variable, but at the time they didn't. So we needed to control startup. Brewer is a Spanish word for crane. It means crane, and I was trying to get a metaphor of stacking containers to make a composition. And we use an analogy of filling the container, which is the Docker's build, and the stacking the container is effectively Docker's run command. It adds explicit dependency ordering so that you can specify this container runs before or after, and also it will watch the log files so you can wait for the Tomcat startup message before attempting to start, for example, before attempting to start the next container. You can also pull information from the environment and from other containers to use in the configuration of the next container that you're bringing up. We haven't got the URLs. If you go to github.com, Marsbar, there's Brewer, there's Docker Alfresco, Puppet Alfresco is all there. these slides are now no longer relevant to our talk, so
Okay.
we can't. This is relevant. Not relevant.
All right, let me jump to the next slide. Okay. Once you've containerized the component parts of Alfresco, it becomes possible to think about scaling horizontally by running different parts of the stack on different hosts. This is not something that Grua supports yet, although in the future it will, possibly will. To do this, you need to work out a way to get a homogeneous network to appear across all the containers on the various hosts. I did a lot of experimentation with a product called Weave, which reports to do exactly that, and it does in unencrypted mode work really well, but when I switched on encryption it became a lot slower. There might be faster options. It was just an initial thing. OpenVPN is another one we were potentially looking at, and Docker's own networking capabilities, which are improving almost daily. We had great results from putting a standalone LibreOffice on its own host, and it seems likely that repo and share could live on separate hosts quite well, but it's a work in progress. It does lead, however, to an intriguing possibility if we can get some kind of clustering solution into Alfresco Community, whether that is in Share's Tomcat or in Solar or perhaps in the LibreOffice document rendering. Then we are in a great position to easily scale containers, perhaps adding load balancing containers and scaling across hosts. We may even be able to dynamically move containers across hosts using something like Kubernetes. To scale the whole system up and down, adding more hosts as demand increases and removing them as it decreases is a really exciting proposition.
Now here I had some nice slides with pictures of monitoring, but we haven't got them. But yeah, you know, a typical DevOps, a really key tenet of DevOps is monitoring, and so there's a few applications out there such as Cacti, Zabbix, and OpenNMS that will really help with that for monitoring the system underneath rather than the actual activity of Alfresco. We've also been doing experiments with integration with other systems and been exploring ActiveMQ and Apache Camel. ActiveMQ is an open source, robust enterprise level message queuing system, and Camel is a routing engine which implements the full suite of enterprise integration patterns and many more integrations on top.
With these two products in conjunction, we can create integration hooks so that any system can communicate with Alfresco, perhaps in ways not yet envisaged yet by Alfresco engineers. ActiveMQ in particular implements a pattern called competing consumer, which is a very efficient load balancer. Using this, we can offload heavy workloads to a farm of processing nodes. Imagine an open source transformation server. With this architecture, we should be able to implement it quite simply. Does this sound interesting to anyone's organization?
Yeah, you want to sponsor open source transformation server?
We're recruiting.
We're the guys, we're recruiting ideas. So by now, I hope you're all thinking these are great projects and how can I get involved? I mean, they both serve slightly different needs. As I could say, Honeycomb is really focused on being out of the box, ready to go for small business with no consultant needed. And Docker Alfresco is more of an experimentation down the line. If you know Puppet, then that's great. Come and get involved and help us. But if you don't know Puppet and you want to learn, best way is to pick your favorite add-on, look at the add-ons examples, and use that to help. And as I say, we'll help you get involved. And if you're excited about Docker, then you get involved in our Docker Alfresco project. It's not Honeycomb. The goal is to eventually to make a multi-hosted containerized Alfresco with a view, hopefully, to getting clustering features into Community eventually.
It would be really helpful to get more eyes on what we've done. Please download and run Honeycomb installer and feedback through GitHub, through our Git repo, any issues. Have a look at our installation configuration. If you see something that you would do differently on your own Community installs, such improvements, let us know, and we will do our best to get them in. So that's it.
I have no idea where the original slides were. At this point, we were going to say, here's our email addresses, contact us. If you need, but really, if you need any advice or help implementing DevOps practices within your Alfresco, we also are into system integration, as I said, with Camel, and Daren in particular is an expert with integrating with Drupal. So any of that sort of stuff, we're for hire. We got time for one question? Anybody got a question?
Yeah, does anyone have a question? Uh-oh.
He's going to get me.
thank you. Great talk. In interest of surviving the zombie apocalypse or the IPO or whatever, wouldn't it make sense to build Honeycomb from source rather than relying on the artifacts that are provided by Alfresco?
Yeah, great question. We are doing that now because we haven't got an artifact repository. I think hopefully within the next month or two we'll be trying to get an artifact repository. We'll have build process to put the artifacts up for ourselves, and then yeah, to get from source for everything. But especially particularly for amps, you know, at the moment if you try and build an amp within Puppet, it's like slow, and it really slows things down. But to have the amp available within our own repository would be a great thing. Tested.
Anybody else? No? All right. Well, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you all.
Oh well, it doesn't work. It's the present.